You guys, it's Tuesday. Oh my gosh. It feels like Monday still because we didn't stream yesterday, but I am so excited to be hanging out with you guys tonight. We have an incredible stream lined up for you this evening with my amazing friend Benji, and I won't wait too long to bring him into the stream because he is just absolutely stellar and is way more fun to listen to than me. But boy, do we have an incredible lineup of guests this week. I think I'm going to keep them a secret until day of. So sorry, you're just going to have to deal with that later on in the moment, but we have some amazing people joining us on the stream this week, including Benji, who you can expect to hear from tonight, and I'm just so happy to be here with all of you. There is so much exciting movement happening across social media platforms for me right now. Like, followings are exploding everywhere, and that includes all of you guys watching live right now on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Rumble, and our OG gang on Getter. We're going to say hi to some people in the live chat, and then I'll tell you about what we're going to be covering tonight because it is a hugely important topic that very few people are wanting to give the appropriate attention to. But first things first, I want to thank our amazing sponsor for tonight's stream, our friends over at Public Square. If you watched last week, you've heard me do this spiel before, but they are such an incredible company, and they have a huge announcement that they shared with the world today, I think, or yesterday, that I'm really excited to relay the info to you on. If you don't already know what Public Square is, you can go to publicsq.com, publicsquare.com, or download Public Square. Again, that's Public SQ on the App Store or the Google Play Store, but it is a nationwide marketplace of freedom-loving businesses that share your values, some of which you can just look on a map, just like you see on the picture right here on your phone for people in your area, like coffee shops or boutiques or dog walking businesses or like anything you could possibly imagine. And the other companies that are on here are national, so you can buy from wherever. But it has never, ever, ever been more important to start supporting businesses that support you and support your values. And Public Square has more than like literally tens of thousands, almost 100,000 people who are getting interested in listing their businesses on here. It is so exciting, really exciting time to be a part of Public Square. You can use it as a business owner. You can use it as a consumer, people who want to buy products. I use it every single day, and they are just absolutely phenomenal and wonderful to work with. Some of you guys already started signing up for Public Square thanks to all of these streams. I actually have like a special link that only exists for me, and I can't seem to find that link right now to drop in the live chat. So if you're a small business owner and you want to start listing your business on Public Square, just put in the "How did you hear about us" section that you heard about it from Isabel Brown. They will make sure that you guys are very well taken care of over there. But the big news that they shared early this week is that they are going public as a company. So they are exploding so much in business and making such an impact on American economy conversations and where we can go to support businesses that support us and share our values and building this concept of a parallel economy, that they are actually going public this week. So you can actually buy stock in Public Square now. I'm just so excited to see the growth of this company. They've been huge supporters of me and my content from the beginning and could not give them enough love. Again, head to publicsq.com or go download the app on the App Store or Google Play. And we love you, Public Square. Okay. Big day, lots to talk about. Last week, we went totally in depth on the stream about East Palestine, Ohio, what the heck happened with the train derailment, what specific chemicals were being polluted into the air, into the water, into the soil, what that's likely going to mean for future generations that have to deal with this problem, as well as a ton of other environmental disasters and problems that were popping up all over the country last week, from the Tucson, Arizona highway spillage with the semi-truck overturning and spilling nitric acid into the air, to the Houston, Texas train derailment, also having risk to pollute the environment with toxic chemical spills, to a plastic factory that went on fire in Florida last week, and literally countless others. If you guys missed that stream, on whatever platform that you're watching on right now, you can go back and rewatch that, because that's where we really get into the nitty-gritty specific details of what chemicals spilled, what that's going to mean for people's health, where these things are happening, what the EPA's response was. And I'm glad that people like myself, who are independently talking about this rather than the mainstream media, were actually able to put enough pressure on our federal government to start remotely paying attention. They finally sent the Secretary of Transportation to East Palestine, Ohio, a few days after after we did that stream. Did anything meaningful come out of that? No, not one bit. But at least we do know that they could hear us and that they are paying attention. Tonight, we're going to take that a little bit further in the conversation with where we can expect this disaster to lead. How is that going to impact the future of the Environmental Protection Agency? What's that going to mean for the future of conversations about conservation and environmentalism? Is environmentalism solely a left-wing value? Spoiler alert, no. And actually, conservation of our beautiful, beautiful environment is truly a conservative value. And I'm super excited to pick my amazing friend Benji's brain on all of this for the stream tonight. He is the founder and president of the American Conservation Coalition, really the only prominent right-of-center environmental organization out there that is doing things from a policy perspective. They're putting pressure on people in Washington and writing legislation or writing briefs that people can use to introduce bills. They're lobbying people in the executive branch through the EPA, through the president and the White House. They've done some amazing work with former President Donald Trump, as well as other executive figures throughout history. They are also doing things from an educational perspective, largely through social media and digital engagement. Could not say enough positive things about ACC, the American Conservation Coalition. And if you guys want to check them out as we do the stream tonight, I will drop the link to their website right now in the live chat across platforms. Again, we're going to be talking with their founder and president, my friend Benji Backer, here in just a minute. But first, I want to say hi to some people in the live chat. Let's start with our OG Getter gang. Big time James is here. Daniel Maynard is here. Randy is here and says, I'm watching from Damascus, Ohio, 20 miles west of the train derailment. Holy cow, Randy. Super excited to hear your perspective on everything in the live chat tonight. Brendan is watching from New York. M-Rock is here. Kat is here. Estefan is here. We've got our guy Alex Padron here. Alex, I'm so glad you're here and so glad you're actually thinking about starting a live stream. So super pumped. Let us all know when that's going to happen, please, because I know we all want to tune in. Let's keep going. We've got Pilot watching on our Getter chat. Eslar is watching on our Getter chat, and so many more. We've got a handful of people watching on Rumble. Go use the chat on Rumble, you guys. It's the best way for us to have a great conversation throughout the stream. On Facebook, Jay is watching. John Kenyon is watching on YouTube. Sarah is watching from Michigan on Facebook. Jason's watching from Sioux Falls, South Dakota on YouTube. Ella is watching from an ACC chapter. We absolutely love that, Ella. So glad that you're here. Emily is watching from Michigan. From Above on YouTube is watching from Florida. Kelly's watching from Colorado. Dang, we've got a great gang across platforms on this beautiful evening. If you guys are just now clicking in, if you found this stream through American Conservation Coalition or Benji Backer and you have no idea who the blonde chick talking to you right now is, hi, my name's Isabel Brown. I'm an independent content creator and full-time live streamer, which means every night we do these live streams so that I can give you a Gen Z perspective onto everything that's going on in the world. We cover news, we cover politics, we cover religion, we cover trending TikTok subjects and everything in between. It is always a party. It is always super fun and very interactive. This is happening in real time. So if you guys have thoughts or reactions or questions about anything we're talking about, drop those things in the live chat throughout the stream. And so many of you have gone above and beyond in the last several days donating in our super chats, which we never ask for, but genuinely thank you from the bottom of my heart. As an independent creator, that can be a really, really stressful thing to have to deal with. And these are all self-funded. Like, this is just the spare bedroom of my apartment. Nobody is paying me to do these streams. We just figure them out on our own because we really, really value independent content creation over here on this corner of the internet. So thank you for your guys' support, for your generosity, for being here. Before I bring Benji in for our conversation, do me a huge favor, and on whatever platform you're watching, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Rumble, Getter, hit the subscribe or follow button. It is totally free to do that. It is totally free to watch these streams. We will never charge to watch these streams every night, but really does make a difference in helping to get this content out there, and especially tonight in helping to support our amazing friends over at the American Conservation Coalition and my amazing friend Benji. All right, without further ado, let's hear from the man himself on where we're going from here with the East Palestine, Ohio ecological disaster, what the American Conservation Coalition is doing to support conservation conversations with people from all walks of life in American politics, what an alternative to the Green New Deal might look like, and so much more. Please join me in welcoming Benji Backer. Benji, you are one of my favorite freaking people, and I'm so glad you are here on the stream with us tonight. You've been so busy, and I actually think I haven't seen you for like 6 months, which is crazy. It feels like yesterday that we went out to lunch.
I believe we live in the same city. I don't know for sure.
I know. We're always coming and going. And actually, what's crazy is it's been almost a year or over a year since we went skiing together in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
I cannot believe that was over a year ago.
It literally blows my mind. So I'm very glad to see you, first of all, and can't wait to hear about all of the adventures you're doing all over the world. Your Instagram's really incredible.
We got to hang out soon.
Yes, we do. I would love to go hit a ski slope somewhere before the season is over.
You better hurry up. Actually, although it's a pretty good year, it might be lasting into April. So
it is. My parents in Colorado say it's still pretty great. So might have to go make the trip back up there. But I want to make the most of our time today for our conversation on the stream. For people who may not know you or ACC or generally what you do in the political and social media ecosystem, no pun intended, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are?
Well, I sure will, and I'm a big fan of an ecosystem, as you alluded to. I'm a lifelong environmentalist and also a lifelong conservative activist. I got active in politics when I was 10 years old and really just loved the conservative beliefs that were kind of out in front then and still are today. This belief that the government is not to be trusted over personal decisions. This belief that the American economy and the American way of life is the best in the world, and we've got work to do, but there's nothing wrong with loving this country and so many of the values that I think we both share. But at the same time, I really love nature and I love being in nature. I'm worried about environmental issues like most people in our generation. And so in college, I started an organization which is the largest kind of right of center environmental organization in the country called the American Conservation Coalition. And, we have a staff and chapters across the country. And really, I mean, what it comes down to is that the left has co-opted this issue for so long, which doesn't help the environment, by the way. It's not to say that the left has only bad ideas, but it's not helpful when there's only one side of the table. But even more so because the lack of competition of ideas creates the Green New Deal or nothing mentality, which is a really damaging one for so many reasons that I'm sure, a lot of the people who follow you understand. And we have to combat that with our own good ideas. And so we're building an ecosystem of people who love the environment, but don't like the left's approach in one way or another. And also finding that common ground with people who might be on the left who are frustrated by that. So we have chapters across the country that people can join and really building up a grassroots presence of center and right of center Americans who love this planet, but want to have a different approach.
It actually blows my mind, not to get too far in the weeds with this before we talk about Ohio, which I know we want to spend most of our time talking about, but it blows my mind that we still live in an America where if you consider yourself to be an environmentalist or to care about conservation or even just enjoy being outside, automatically you're presumed to be a radical leftist, that you genuinely want authoritarian socialism or no deal. Like that has to be the direction going forward in our country, because that's actually not even remotely true if we look backwards in our nation's history as well. The first president who ever set aside public land was Abraham Lincoln. Teddy Roosevelt laid the foundation for the National Park Service, which was the first national parks ever in the world. Richard Nixon started the EPA, which most people have no idea that is even remotely part of our chapter of history in the United States, that it's been conservative political people who are leading the way for conservation, and that still is happening today. So I love that you, as an organization, are doing so much work in policy. You guys write a lot of legislation. You lobby a lot in Washington, D.C. You put pressure on our political leaders to take action on this issue, because still in 2023, as well as way back when under a Lincoln presidency, it's consistently been conservative figures that are leading the way for conservation. Why do you think that narrative has been co-opted so much by the AOCs of the world?
Well, it really started with Al Gore.
Because
when Al Gore ran on a platform of kind of climate alarmism, that was one of the first campaigns around the environment that proved that the more radical you were on it, the more attention you were going to get for that. And that has stayed true today. I mean, the reason that we know of Greta, AOC, other people like that is not because their ideas have a chance of being, part of a good, honest law that our country could really move forward with, but because they say the craziest things. And unfortunately, that's just how politics is in general.
True.
But on the environmental issue, that used to not be the case, similar to other issues. And so you were allowed to have this kind of bipartisan agreement. You were allowed to have George H.W. Bush or Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan or Teddy Roosevelt lead on these issues. And people knew about it, but it wasn't in pop culture all the time like it is now. But when Al Gore made it popular to basically scare people into doing something, or in a lot of cases, for probably most of the listeners here, oppose those ideas, it became kind of a hot button divisive issue. And so, you had Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton debating climate change on stage. And let's just say it wasn't the same conversation we were having in the 90s between Republicans and Democrats who were running for president. And the AOCs of the world, the Gretas of the world, the people who have opposed them and not come up with their own ideas on the right have all contributed to that. And it is really frustrating because the planet and our country are at a disservice when that's the case. And we're seeing that play out right now with some of the bad ideas that are coming out of California, New York, other places. But we're also seeing that problem, come to the forefront in places where they haven't been taking environmental issues seriously because they have seen it as like a liberal issue. And we have to return to the days where it's not. The last thing here is just like on an anecdotal level, when I ask older conservatives, older kind of independent people, if they consider themselves an environmentalist today, in a crowd of kind of attendees for a conference, almost every hand stays down. But when I say, were you environmentalist in the 90s, almost every hand goes up. So it definitely has transitioned into this partisan food fight that it doesn't have to be.
That's such an interesting reality with the raising of hands. I was just speaking at a mutual friend of ours conference in Orlando a couple of weeks ago, and I was on a panelist with a leftist counterpoint to my point of view. And it was interesting because I asked people, can you raise your hand if you would consider yourself to be an environmentalist? And all of these were current college students, and every single hand stayed raised in the whole room. And then I said, okay, keep your hand up if you would consider yourself to be conservative. And about half the hands went down. And I said, put it back up if you would consider yourself to be more on the left side of things. About half the hands went back up. So I think for Gen Z, it's not so much a partisan issue. And I see a lot of hope with that, especially when we see stories like the multitude of wild environmental disasters that have happened in the last couple of weeks. Last week, we went in insane detail into what was happening in East Palestine, Ohio with the train derailment, as well as touching on the Houston train derailment and the Tucson, Arizona semi-truck being overturned, and like a bunch of different stories. You just wrote an op-ed for The Hill in Washington, D.C. talking about this crazy situation in Ohio. Can you share with us a little bit what your perspective and point of view looks like?
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard about East Palestine and the damage that has happened there, and we all know how bad it is because the visuals are just so horrific. And what we forget about is that these sorts of things are happening, unfortunately, far too often than we're giving it credit for. I mean, we have some serious environmental problems happening, and the reason that we don't hear about them is because if they're not as visual as this was, and they're in a community that doesn't really have the resources to prop up that story, we're never going to hear about it. And fortunately for this instance, I mean, obviously it's very unfortunate that happened, but we wouldn't have heard about it if it wasn't so visual. If there were just toxins in the water and fish were dying and the water was bad, like we wouldn't have really heard about that. But because of that that huge smoke and the crazy doomsday Stranger Things-esque sky,
that's actually what it looked like, actually.
I felt like we were looking at the underworld of Stranger Things and that they predicted it for some reason. That was kind of freaky. And it also, like, Stranger Things was kind of centered in a community like that, so that also was kind of weird. But yeah, I mean, I think we a lot of these communities do not have the voice on environmental issues that they need to have. And if this sort of event would have happened in a very ritzy area like Martha's Vineyard or Aspen or, places like that, which those are places I love. They're beautiful places, but they're full of people who have the resources and the ability to kind of like make it a problem for the American people to pay attention to. Maybe it should be a problem that the American people are paying attention to. They don't have those resources in some of these lower income communities. And what I was, struck by is the left and right's kind of unified response in terms of low income communities, these marginalized communities who don't have the resources or the income to fight back against these problems are the most affected by them. And we have to do better than that. Americans deserve clean air. Americans deserve clean water. We pour so much money into environmental protection, and it should be working for us. And right now it hasn't been. And that's something that we have to grapple with, and we have to have better solutions.
You keep saying we probably never would have heard of this story if it wasn't so visual. And I think that is a component into why it blew up as such a big story. But the truth is, this happened like the first week of February, and
Right.
nobody wanted to talk about it, and nobody in the mainstream media was covering
Right.
it. Our politicians were ignoring it. The Secretary of Transportation took, 3 weeks to even consider a trip to Ohio. The president still hasn't been. He chose to go to Europe instead and do a whole tour of how they're doing things right instead of how we could be doing things right, which was incredibly frustrating, but we can cover that another time. I think the reason we heard about this is because people who are doing kind of what we do, that are more independent, that are using social media as a means to disseminate information, were giving it the time of day. And I saw all of this on TikTok well before I ever saw anybody in the mainstream media want to cover it. And the reason they were forced to was because everyone was demanding that our media tell us what the hell is going on in the world, what the news is supposed to do. Are you seeing that with other ecological disasters and environmental problems? Are they being ignored by the people in power?
Totally. And it's this whole idea of the flyover country. I mean, I grew up in Wisconsin, where people are often left behind as well with these things. I mean, Green Bay, the place where the Packers are, and my favorite sports team, but also a place that is a beautiful part. Hey, come on, a beautiful part of the country has had these sorts of issues in the water for years and decades, and no one would ever know about that. And it's because it's seen as kind of like, why should we care about it? It's not the essence of what AOC and Greta are visiting. I don't think AOC, I've visited almost every state to see environmental issues. I do not believe AOC has visited even anywhere close to half of the places that I visited, but yet she's the one making the laws and talking about it all the time. And so when it's a state or a place that is deemed not important enough, her and the media and other places are just not going to cover it, and they're not even going to pay attention. I don't even know if it's often malicious as it is just pure ignorance to what is happening in the real world. And I've toured places in Louisiana and West Virginia, in the most rural parts of this country, that are having significant environmental disasters happening, whether it's abandoned mines that are having tons of issues, whether it's the methane that's leaking out of specific oil and gas facilities, whether it's the mining for solar and wind parts. I mean, when we're powering our communities, when we're transporting chemicals, when we're doing these things, people don't realize how sensitive these situations are. And in the communities that can't afford to tell their story about these bad disasters, the media and the national politicians aren't going to do it either, because it's not important for their narrative. And it's important if it happens in New York, because AOC can do her kind of urban thing. But a lot of the times these rural communities are left behind because they're deemed as not part of that narrative.
And who are often significantly impacted by environmental issues way more than somebody living in a Navy Yard, Washington, D.C. apartment who touches concrete all day. And so I just find it so interesting that these people who live in TV studios in skyscraper cities are trying to spin this narrative and create this narrative that often ignores the real problems that we're dealing with as a country, because they don't have an intimate connection or a personal connection with it. And I think with this East Palestine, Ohio story, we've seen it even taken one step further. There was a whole segment on The View last week where The View hosts were saying, well, those people voted for Trump, so honestly, they kind of deserve that happened to them. And when trains derail because you make deregulation happen at the federal level, which, by the way, has been a debunked story every single time, that no Trump deregulation remotely contributed to this train derailing, but I digress. When you vote for people who don't support socialism, basically regulating every single part of life, well, you kind of deserve when these things happen to you. That was said on national television.
it is wild, this kind of disdain for rural America that the environmental community has had. And that's why there needs to be an alternative voice, which is what we're doing. Because, I mean, I saw this play out when I lived in Seattle for 6 years. Obviously, Seattle is one of the most liberal places in the country. It's also one of the most beautiful. And one of the really kind of eye-opening instances for me was one of the first summers I was there. The wildfires were absolutely horrific, way worse than they should be, way worse than they have been in previous decades and in previous years. And what happened that summer was everyone was worried about what's happening in Seattle. Like, I can't see, I can't do all these things. And it's like, well, what about the rural areas that are literally burning up right now? What about the farmland and the animals that are going to be incredibly negatively impacted that you rely on for your food and for your daily life? What about the ability for people to just live their lives in these communities that actually rely on the environment? I mean, when you live in a tall building, yeah, it sucks to look outside your window and see smoke, but what about the impact of these sorts of disasters on the communities that rely on these areas to survive? The forest, the timber companies, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
That people don't think about. And I think it is this disdain for rural America. And I honestly don't think the environmental conversation really anymore is conservative versus liberal. I do feel like it's mostly rural versus urban, and urban people really not understanding what rural communities are going through because they don't even think about it. They don't think about it for a second. And you can't have good environmental outcomes if you're not engaging rural communities. But I have often been the only environmentalist that has ever visited an energy site, a farm, these places that people should be going to understand what we need to do to move forward. No one's doing that except for our organization. And, we're obviously so much smaller and newer than all these other legacy environmental organizations. So it's very frustrating. And it does really come down to Trump voters, rural people. They just kind of get overshadowed, and it's problematic for all of us.
I think you can even take that a step further. I love that divide between urban and rural, but I even say this, especially from a Gen Z political perspective. I talk about this a lot. We aren't really living in a right versus left America anymore, or a Republican versus Democrat America anymore. They'd like for us to believe that that's still true, but I actually think we're living in an everybody in power, which often happens to be in urban areas, versus everybody else. And there's this like disdain for people who aren't walking the halls of Congress, who aren't giving you a news broadcast, who are doing the more boots on the ground, independent, go around the system thing. And I just find that so fascinating at the intersection of environmentalism, because the people that we look to be the loudest voices on this, the Gretas, the AOCs, the Al Gores, the John Kerrys, the Leonardo DiCaprios, are all these elite individuals who fly around the world on private jets. They try to lecture us about what our car emissions are going to look like, but they don't even have cars themselves. So I don't think that they can, or they don't use them anyway. They live in really big cities. So I don't know that they can personally relate to that very much. They try to talk about reforming agriculture, but they've probably never really toured a farm or been to a farm. And that dichotomy is just continuing to grow more and more. And this East Palestine, Ohio story has just really highlighted that in so many ways for people. And I hope is opening people's eyes to the fact that the EPA, the same people that are so consistently worried about every single move that people make, turns around and tells people, go home. You can drink the water. You can shower in it. It's fine. Like, everything's great. Or the Department of Transportation not even wanting to visit the place where their mistakes or problems that they should be looking into and taking leadership on is causing toxic spillage into the water, into the soil, into the air. And people are probably going to be dealing with health crises for decades to come as a result of this. So that urban, rural, people in power versus everybody else dichotomy, I think carries over into other policy issues, but is particularly important here. When it comes to Ohio, what now? I mean, everybody acknowledged that it was happening. We got a visit from Pete over to Ohio. We admitted it was real, but now what? I mean, I think I've just seen it like totally fizzle out and disappear, and even people on TikTok aren't posting about it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's also just the news of the day. It's
True.
a flash in the pan, unfortunately, when sometimes things shouldn't be. But I think what they're doing now has been a better response than the first few weeks, and it should have happened so much sooner because they could have avoided so many of these problems. But when you look at the EPA, like, I think a lot of conservatives, unfortunately, jump to the opinion, the EPA is not doing its job. It's really overfunded. It's not well run. So we should just abolish it. The environment is a common good. Like, we are constantly taking from the environment every day when we live our lives. And that's okay. I'm not like shaming us. Like, that's just how we survive. By having this conversation, we're taking up energy resources that will have to power our technology once we're done with this conversation. Everything we do, eat, sleep, everything we do has some sort of take on the environment. So there should be some sort of environmental agency at the federal level, but it needs to be at the right times. And this was one of those times where they should have stepped in. And the reason that they didn't was because everything at the EPA is so much focused on this national and international perspective rather than the local perspective. And when the EPA was created, it was meant to be federal support for instances like the Ohio event. Like, it wasn't meant to mandate everyone do the same thing. It was meant to say, okay, Ohio is having this problem, Washington State's having this problem. We're going to help manage these things and provide resources if we need to, and be more of a supportive role than the guiding principle that tells everyone what to do and how to do it. When in reality, we all know environmental issues are different in different parts of the country, and a one-size-fits-all policy isn't going to work. So what now? I would say we need to rethink how the EPA is working. How do we make it more effective to have an agency that oversees the environment? How can we return to its original intent, which, like you said, was created by Republicans and with support of Democrats? How can we return back to those roots of supporting local communities, supporting regions? They have regional EPA administrators that they don't even use because it's not federal, it's not big enough. And I think it also comes from the activist class. The activist class on the left on this issue is basically like, nothing's ever good enough. We can't have these step-by-step changes. We can't have a change in the Pacific Northwest and one in the Southeast. We just need one big thing, one big mandate. And we have to get out of the mind. We have to get young people out of that mindset that works, because it doesn't. It doesn't help prevent disasters like this in Ohio. But if they would have taken a regional or local approach, it might have not prevented it, but it for sure would have prevented the damage from being as bad as it was. And I think that's what needs to happen. And I'm not so sure that the Biden administration understands really anything about these issues. They don't seem to have anything more than talking points. And so that's why it'd be great to have Republicans lead on this.
I totally agree with you. In terms of a individualistic perspective, how do you foresee this impacting agriculture, people's lung health, water pollution? I don't think we've really sat down and thought about what polluting the Ohio River with the same chemicals that we used as chemical warfare weapons in World War I is really going to look like. But this is a massive issue. And of course, you're also starting to see a million other different problems pop up around the country. You see plastic factory fires in South Florida. You're seeing egg facilities and chicken facilities burn down across the country, oddly and suspiciously. You see more train derailments, toxic spillage on freeways, closing the freeway. Just here in Arizona last week, a semi-truck overturned and spilled nitric acid into the air, and they were telling everybody within a mile radius to shut the vents to their house because they probably would experience poisoning. And that is just not covered ever, right? So when we think about Ohio, but all of these other things that are happening, what does that mean from a quality of life perspective? And what problems do you anticipate that we're going to be facing for the next several decades?
Well, we've been, having people push for a Green New Deal and kind of these radical policies, and no environmental policy has gotten, across the finish line because of this kind of distraction. All these problems keep manifesting into worse and worse and worse issues. And it's because we're thinking about the right problem with the wrong solutions. And from an individual perspective, these communities are going to continue dealing with these disasters more and more and more, not just chemicals, but forest fires and, other natural disasters that are happening, some due to humans, some not. And we're not prepared. We're not ready. And it's because we're distracted. We're distracted by these radical policies, and we have to demand better from our elected officials. And it's not just Congress; it's also our local elected officials. It's, I interface with heads of sustainability of cities and counties all the time, and they almost always are very far left, and they're almost always bought into this kind of Green New Deal mentality instead of worrying about what they could do in their own local communities. So we need to demand, not just from the federal government, but from our local leaders, better responses, more of an offensive strategy, and not just saying, okay, this horrible thing happened, how can we deal with it? More about how can we deal with it before it even becomes something that's horrible. This isn't looking like the America that has led the world in having clean air and clean water over the past few decades. This is returning back to like industrial revolution, not really caring about the environment, but this time we actually know better. In the industrial revolution, we were just trying to innovate and do the things that we needed to do to grow society. We know a lot better now, and yet these things keep happening. They're very preventable, and it really will take a kind of Green New Deal-esque movement to push for that change from elected leaders and companies. Otherwise, we're just going to keep having these things go worse and worse and worse in more and more communities, and we can't afford to let that happen for so many reasons. Environmentally, health-wise, economically, we cannot afford that.
Okay, so if the Green New Deal is not the answer, which I'm on board with, but let's just play devil's advocate, right? It's really the only plan I've seen put out in the last several decades. Typically, from a sweeping national perspective, right-of-center individuals don't really like to talk about the environment. We did see President Trump take a lot of action, mostly thanks to the efforts of you guys lobbying the administration, which was great, especially through the Great American Outdoors Act. So kudos to you guys for leading on that. But honestly, that's really the only solution that I've seen put forward from a tangible policy perspective. If you're going to talk to the average young person, especially, who's totally bought into it's the Green New Deal or no dice, what's the problem with it?
Well, I think what it comes down to is that you're right. There hasn't been an opposing idea, and we have that, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But when you don't have an opposing idea, it's like Obamacare all over again. If if the viewers were alive and paying attention to the healthcare conversation, even if you don't know anything about it, which I don't know a ton about healthcare, we all know that a lot of people, even on the left, didn't like Obamacare. Just kind of like a lot of people, even not those on the left, don't like the Green New Deal. So we hear this rhetoric of the Green New Deal sucks all the time, just like we heard Obamacare sucks all the time. But when you don't have an alternative, you end up getting the thing that you don't want. Yeah. And that's really, really scary. And unfortunately, we haven't had that put out there. The reason that the Green New Deal is wrong is, it could be literally hours and hours of conversation debunking everything. But the worst part about it is that it's not feasible. It's tens of trillions of dollars being spent on things that actually wouldn't work and wouldn't reduce emissions. And none of it, literally none of it, with like the EV mandates, the solar and wind mandates, none of it would do anything except for harm the environment and harm the economy. So, a lot of people know that, but the problem is they're worried about these environmental issues so much that they're like, you know what, I don't like this. It doesn't seem right, but I need something. I need some sort of solution, so I'm just going to go along with it. And that's why even a lot of young Republicans, according to our polling, unfortunately, support the Green New Deals because they've only heard of it. And that's why our organization decided, okay, we have all these ideas that we're pushing for. It's basically what the Green New Deal is in terms of pushing for a bunch of ideas, except these ones work. We just haven't packaged them together well. And so we recently launched the Climate Commitment, which is our alternative to the Green New Deal. And it's a 6-pillared, kind of nuanced. It's a little bit wonky. It's a little bit complicated. But that's what these issues are. They're not as sizzly as saying ban fossil fuels. It's not as sizzly as saying we all need to drive an electric vehicle tomorrow. Yeah. And it's not as sizzly as saying that socialism is better than capitalism when it comes to the environment. But it actually makes a difference. And that's why the Climate Commitment, which hopefully we can rally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans to push for, to start to get those sorts of policies rather than the Green New Deal. And if you want to learn more, it's at theclimatecommitment.com. And it's a really easy read through. And there's plenty of ways that we could take action right now that would boost the economy, create more affordability and reliability with our energy, and also protect the environment all at the same time.
Love, and I can't wait to ask you more about that. You said it's 6 pages long, which I love because I just looked up, and the Green New Deal isn't actually like a bill right now. They put it forward as a resolution, which hasn't passed. Obviously, there's been a lot of back and forth with all of that, and it's 14 pages, so it's twice as simple, which I love. And that's actually not even that long.
It's a lot more complicated when you start getting into the actual details, which is why we have those as well. But it's its basic principles can be summarized fairly quickly, and
Yeah.
that's how it should be, because it's about an approach. And the same solutions that work right now will not be the same in 10 years.
Yeah.
Technology changes, the environment changes. We're going to have different. So it's all about the approach, and that's what the climate commitment does. And then we can make informed, smart policy decisions because we have a different approach.
So for those watching who probably don't know all of the actual nitty-gritty details of the Green New Deal, go read it yourself and go research what people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are saying about it, and really what their perfect scenario utopia of a new generation of America would look like if we were able to, in her words, like stop the planet from blowing up, right? By mandating electric vehicles overnight, by unionizing every single sector of the American workforce and economy and making it part of our public sector. Like, genuinely, it is a Trojan horse for socialism and for authoritarianism, because they think that they'll be able to control emissions and control our carbon footprint and control agriculture a lot better if the government has its thumbprint on absolutely every part of our society. And they essentially want to model that after what other totalitarian countries look like, which is ironic because socialist countries, despite what they may tell you, are often much, much worse at pollution than we are, namely China. So it's not the utopia that they would like for you to believe. So go read it. But as a foil to that, what I love about your guys' climate commitment and this document that you've put together as an alternative plan to the Green New Deal is that you're really spurring innovation. You're spurring a return to local control and communities versus this federal or international level that the Green New Deal is really pushing for. Honestly, could even be a segue for global government, not just socialism, when you hear these people talk about it. What do those pillars look like? From a practical perspective, what does the climate commitment from ACC support?
Well, it really supports this bright vision that we should be thinking of when it comes to our environment. The environment is the thing that unites a lot of us, and it's the reason that, like the actual physical environment is the reason that I'm active in the climate related dialogue. And it's the reason that you care about it too. We love being outside. We love being in nature. We have to return environmentalism back to the environment again. And that's something that seems really simple, but the environment has not been about the environment. It's been about the politics. So it's returning to the conservation roots of our country, of the way that we can solve problems. It's talking about the innovation and the opportunities that the next generation, our generation, has to innovate and be the entrepreneurs to solve these challenges. We don't have all the solutions, so we're going to need a lot of really good ideas and startup businesses and more innovation in that regard. We're also going to have to get government out of the way of deploying some of these really good ideas, where right now the permitting process in this country forces some of these amazing technologies that could be boosting America's economy, environment, national security. We're waiting 5 to 10 years for just the government to say yes, when it would never take that long in any other country, even the most government controlling countries in this planet. So there's all these sorts of ideas, but it's all about a positive vision for the future instead of kind of this like we're all going to die overnight, and that's just not true. I mean, I had one of the most prominent climate scientists come on my podcast, Coming Clean, this week, and talking about what the science actually says. It says that we've got some challenges to figure out, but it's challenges to figure out. It's challenges that we can figure out. It's opportunities for job growth. It's opportunities for people to boost their livelihoods instead of have it take away things. And he said, and he's one of the most well-regarded scientists in the world, actually, that the left of center ideas around this, the Green New Deal stuff, does more harm than good. And that the ideas of like the climate commitment and stuff paint a picture of what actually needs to happen. And there's a really big opportunity for those, not just on the right of center, but on the left of center, who are sick of the Green New Deal, to advocate for these kind of common sense ideas around the climate commitment. And by the way, very pro-nuclear as well. And that's, there's really no way of getting out of any of these challenges without nuclear. There's no way to get out of these challenges without managing forest fires. There's no way to get out of these challenges without doing common sense conservation and getting government out of the way. And that's what the climate commitment is all about.
When I was poking around the website for this new project for you guys, what I love about it is it's really all encompassing. It's not just like an energy policy document where you're promoting new innovation of energy. You're not just talking about getting nuclear involved in the American sector of energy and innovation. It's really about agriculture and supporting farmers and ranchers. It's about trail maintenance and public lands and national parks and so many other things as well. And really, really supporting our economy, which is a huge, huge, important conversation we should be having right now, especially when we are in a devastating outlook for what the next several years are going to look like. And it's not a flashy conversation that a lot of people like to have. It's a lot more fun to say, I support the environment, so I'm going to be a leftist. Well, actually, if you support the environment and you want to afford the most basic goods and services, there might be a better and a different approach. And I love that about this document because it just provides so many opportunities for conversation with people and just to change people's minds on this really important issue. Do you see there to be opportunities to implement this from a legislative perspective? What policy leaders are already gravitating towards this? Tell us a little bit about who you guys are already working with, state, federal, local, any level, and what that could look like from a practical policy initiative perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate hearing that because it is, our goal is to make this incredibly practical and incredibly holistic, because the reality of these issues is that they are very complicated, as I've already mentioned, but they touch so many parts of our lives, right? Like the environmental issues don't just touch energy. They don't just touch agriculture. They don't just touch public lands. They don't just touch forestry and all the things that around forest fires. Like it's like this kind of wide encompassing issue that it touches on a lot of parts of our lives. And so you need to have an approach that touches on all of those if you're actually going to move forward. What the Green New Deal does is it just kind of focuses on electric vehicles and solar and wind and that sort of thing, and actually ignores a lot of the other things. So that's why we have crafted that way on purpose. And we're finding that at the national level and at the state level, there's so much interest to pursue these ideas, and even on the center left. So at the national level in Congress, we're seeing almost 24 already bills have been introduced since the start of the year to tackle natural climate solutions, which is related to sustainable agriculture, restoring ecosystems, kind of that conservation-oriented way of reducing emissions. We're seeing a ton of bills be put forward on that. We're seeing bills put forward on nuclear energy, getting government out of the way of existing projects that need to be deployed. There's all sorts of policies around those ideas right now that are gaining a ton of steam. In Florida, with Governor DeSantis, obviously one of the most conservative governors in the country, he's not only acting on the things that I just mentioned nationally, but he's also doing adaptation resiliency measures. He's passed some of the most comprehensive policies with Democrat support. Of course, he doesn't get any credit for that, but
True.
With Democrat support to restore the Everglades, to clean up the bleaching of coral reefs in the ocean, to help fishermen and people who are relying on the wildlife to survive for our economy, to have more of an ability to restore these areas. He's been not just playing offense in terms of coming up with future-oriented solutions, where Florida is one of the highest renewable states in the country. There's tons of nuclear. He's very much thinking about the future there. He's also thinking about how do we adapt to the problems that we're having right now. And we're seeing that across the country. But the problem is it doesn't get any credit from the mainstream media. The problem is that it's not as sexy as some of the talking points on the left. And we as an American people, as a younger generation, need to stand up and say, you know what, I don't like this radical approach. I want a common sense approach, whether it's promoting the climate commitment itself, which kind of exudes the principles of what's happening nationally and in states like Florida, or it's just shouting those things from the rooftops. We have to give it the credit that it deserves, because there's a lot of good being done, and there's a lot more that could be done if the American people gave it a larger marketplace for action.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. And I love everything that Governor Ron DeSantis is doing. He's been working through environmental issues through his entire tenure as governor. And I think just now people are starting to pay attention to it a little bit with some rumblings of potential future running opportunities he might have. But talk about an unsung hero in a policy area he gets absolutely zero credit for, but is doing all the right things. Florida is totally leading on conservation from a practical perspective. Sadly, we never hear about it because people would rather talk about Disney or your elementary school classroom classroom or drag queens, but that is a
Right.
huge area I would encourage anybody watching the stream to go do more research on. Wrapping up here in our last couple of minutes, this is a topic, just generally environmentalism and conservation, that is hugely important to our generation. And we've had many a conversation over a drink and while we were skiing about what that means in terms of a marketing and a political perspective going into the future presidential elections, going into our opportunities to run for Congress as a generation, that it's not a partisan issue. Sadly, I think so many people in party leadership on both sides do view this as a partisan issue and are using marketing tactics and strategies to convince Generation Z that the only way for them to be environmentalists is to be full on board the authoritarian leftist, even socialist train. Where do you think conservatives, both individuals just out and about in their life, parents maybe of teenagers, teachers who might be watching this stream, people running for office, people with podcasts or shows themselves, where can they take the initiative to change that conversation and start having a different dialogue that conservation is really a conservative value?
Well, it's that's exactly right, and it all starts with each person that has influence in society, whether that's a teacher or media. It's people like you. It's so many people standing up and saying there is an alternative approach, and without that, we're going to continue kind of perpetuating this denial versus Green New Deal mentality that's really plaguing our country right now in more ways than just the environment. As I said, the economy, other things that are really being hampered by it. And I feel like what we have an opportunity to do as a more right of center community right now, especially ahead of the 2024 election, is to have all the candidates embrace environmental protection, but in their own way. Have all the candidates have their own kind of platform and ideas of solutions. And instead of debating whether or not we should do something about these issues, actually debate the ideas and the merits behind the solutions or so-called solutions. And if we can do that, then we can show that we care, that we have good ideas, and that in fact we care more, that our ideas are even better than the ideas of the authoritative left. And if we can do that, we're going to win an entire generation of young voters. But it will take the party leadership, especially the Republican Party leadership, to say, you know what, we're going to be the first mover. We're going to be the ones to get out of this divisive rhetoric, and we're going to lead on solutions. We're going to lead on positivity. We're going to be the party that's known as the ones who help move our country in the right direction once again on environmental issues. They've got to do that, because if they don't, they obviously risk the other side doing that with really, really bad ideas. And we can't afford that as a party. We can't afford that as a country. And as I said, our environment can't afford it either. And if we can lead from the front, and we can urge our elected officials to lead from the front, not just with talking points, but actual solutions, then we're going to go a long way to protecting our environment, boosting our economy, and winning elections, which we all want to do as well.
For those hoping to just learn more about this subject at the get-go, maybe they don't know a lot about what's going on environmentally in our country, where they can find better resources. I feel like this is oddly mirroring the last several years that we saw with healthcare policy and pandemic response, where the science is like 5 people who aren't really actually even experts on the subject. I love that you mentioned that one podcast episode with the leading climate scientists. Do you have any names or websites or suggestions, maybe even your guys' own social media and website, where people can go just to get the basics and the right information?
Yeah, and that's really been the problem, and that's the void we're trying to fill, is that those resources haven't been there for people to get that alternative opinion. So we have our own academy of courses that are fairly short, that talk about the principles of this kind of approach, this alternative conservative approach. We also have the Climate Commitment, which has a lot of examples that are related to all these things. My podcast, which is called Coming Clean, has a lot of conversations around this. We have these resources out there now. There's going to be a book next year that's going to have this as the center point.
Exciting.
Penguin, called The Conservative Case for Climate Optimism. The resources are out there now, and hopefully our organization can help provide them. We've worked with some amazing organizations like ClearPath and C3 Solutions, and some of the other kind of more policy-oriented organizations in this space to come up with a lot of this content. But if you go to acc.eco or you go to theclimatecommitment.com, 2 separate websites, we have so many resources there for people to choose from. And if, this is going to take an educated community of people to change the narrative on. We can't just do it with talking points. The left has the talking points. They've co-opted it. We need to lead on what actually works, because that's the only thing that will beat the talking points. And of course, we need to have great marketing. We need to have our leaders kind of shout it from the rooftops, but we have to understand it ourselves and really fight back against the wrong narratives. And hopefully with the resources that we've provided and will continue to provide, we can equip the next generation to really lead on this in a way that's helpful and fruitful for all of us.
You are absolutely correct. And as always, the best. Benji, thank you so much for joining us on the stream tonight.
And I really appreciate you having this conversation, because we don't have it enough on the right, and we've got to be dedicated to it and be open to it, and not just shudder at everything that the left says and then stay silent on it all. And you've been leading from that, and for a long time now, which is really, really appreciated.
Oh, thanks, Benji. You are so great. Where can people find you on social media? I know you just mentioned all of ACC's stuff, but how about you?
So I'm at Benji Backer on all platforms. That's Benji with a J. Don't spell it with a G. You won't find me. But Benji Backer on social media. And the podcast Coming Clean, you can just search that on any podcast platform. But yeah, so Benji Backer, and hopefully I post some interesting things on everything. But ACC also does a lot of great kind of resource posting, and we've got a TikTok and Instagram and Twitter that can be found at ACC_national that also has so many resources. And there's plenty of other influencers and people in this space, and I can't list them all right now, but if you follow me or at ACC, you'll be able to find them there too.
Beautiful. Benji, keep telling the truth. We need you as a warrior out there on the front lines, and hopefully I will see you on a ski slope very, very soon.
At least for coffee. We got to at least set that.
I know. We got to make that happen for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hi guys, sorry. Got my water. Hydrate or dihydrate, baby. Am I right? I also picked up a friend. Do you want to say anything to the people? No? Do you have stage fright? This is my dog. Any words? No? She's like, why'd you wake me up for this? It's okay, Libby. That is my dog, Liberty. She is a hoot. Very cute. You guys, how great is Benji? I dropped the links to his organization and to the climate commitment, which is the foil plan to the Green New Deal that we spent some time talking about tonight, in the chat across platforms. So you guys should have access to look at all of those things, to do a little bit more research. Genuinely is such an important conversation that really nobody is having right now in the space. So love him, love everything that he's doing. It has been such a pleasure to become friends with Benji over the last several years and to continue supporting his mission and the organization and everything that they are doing. Huge thank you to Big Time James for donating in our super chat tonight, and to all of you guys for being so vocal with your thoughts and feedback and general commentary in the chat across platforms. As I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, this stream was sponsored by Public Square, and if you guys have a small business or even a not so small business that you would like to be listed in their marketplace of businesses that share conservative, freedom fighting, pro-family, pro-faith values across America, especially now that they are going public this week, which is huge. They're a publicly traded company. You can use the link that I'm dropping in the live chat right now to start listing your business over there with our amazing friends at Public Square. Use that link, the first one that I just dropped, to list your business, and the second one that I am dropping right now, you guys can use to download the app. We love Public Square. All right, we got another amazing person in our live chat. Jason donated for Liberty. They donated for you. to give you a better life for more Treatos. That's a good life. Can you say thank you to Jason? She's very appreciative, and so am I. You guys are the absolute best. It's been a very great stream hanging out with all of you. Do me a favor, hit that follow button or the subscribe button on whatever platform you are watching on. It is totally free to watch all of these streams and always will be, and I'm just so unbelievably grateful for all of your guys' support and continuing to cheer me on with all of my content. Make sure you're following Benji and ACC across platforms and check out his podcast, Coming Clean. He's had some amazing guests over there lately and could not recommend him and the organization enough. We have a stellar lineup of guests coming for the rest of the week, and I cannot wait to share them with you, but I think I'm going to keep them a surprise for now anyway. So stay tuned for that. There's a lot of surprises up our sleeve for an amazing week ahead. Continue being good people. Tell the truth. Love you all very much, and I will see you tomorrow night for the stream. Thanks, guys.